Hello everyone, welcome to Compliance for All live webinar on FDA's proposed rule regarding device establishment, registration, and listing, and how to register and list. My name is Ron, and I'm going to be your host for today's session. On behalf of the Compliance for All team, I'd like to thank you all for being part of this event. Today's webinar will be presented by David R. Dills. A few words about David before we could start off today's session. David R. Dills, Regulatory Affairs and Compliance Consultant, currently provides regulatory compliance and quality consultative services for medical device and pharmaceutical or combination manufacturers, and also has an accomplished record with more than 24 years of experience with Class 1, 2, and 3 medical devices, in vitro diagnostics, and pharmaceuticals in the area of regulatory affairs, compliance, and quality systems. He has been previously employed with increasing responsibilities by medical device manufacturers and consultancies, including a globally recognized CRO. We're honored to have David with us to present today's webinar. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, I'd like to inform you of the program outline for this training session. This webinar is for 60 minutes duration. First, David will take you through today's webinar, highlighting the areas that will be covered, and he will then share with you his presentation. And we would like to inform all our participants, once you're part of this teleconference, your phone lines will be placed on mute and would remain so until the Q&A window begins towards the end of the webinar. We also request all attendees to hold back your questions until the Q&A window begins. 10 minutes of your time will be allotted for the Q&A, during which your questions will be answered. And if for any reason you get logged out of this training session or teleconference, please follow the same procedure to join in again. And now that we're all ready to start, I request David to take it from here. David?
Thank you, Ron. I also would like to extend my welcome to our participants online today for our webinar entitled FDA's Proposed Rule, which is now final, and I'll explain why momentarily as we resume our presentation regarding device establishment, registration, and listing, and certainly how to register and list efficiently and effectively, and certainly compliant with FDA's requirements. We'll take you through the entire process, but with key emphasis on what are the significant changes from 2012 to the device registration and listing process. Our agenda, as set forth, will identify who's required to register and list, and certainly, more importantly, when and how. We'll review the new changes to FDA's device establishment registration and the listing regulations under the final rule, and also very quick emphasis to the Bioterrorism Act as related to the importation of devices, irrespective of device classification. Certainly, we'll provide clarification of who must provide establishments registration numbers, and certainly replacement of the current regulations regarding updating device listing information outside the required update periods. We'll make reference to the term, the FDAAA, also known as the FDA Innovation Act, and why this is imposing new requirements if you are a device manufacturer or an importer online today. And we'll go through some of the key highlights and the key aspects of the FDA SIA and why that's important for our participants online today, as well as providing resources and guidance to help define a proven strategy for registering and listing. And then, as alluded to at the end of our presentation, we'll open up the lines to questions that you may have, as well as discussion, and we'll certainly follow up to your questions as well in the event that we don't have sufficient time to address any and all questions. But certainly, you will be in a position to contact Global Compliance Panel, Compliance for All, with any follow-up questions that you may have, and we'll certainly get back to you expeditiously with our responses. But before we begin our presentation, again, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be online today for our 1-hour webinar. I am making the assertion and assumption that most of our participants online, presumably, are device manufacturers, contract manufacturers, possibly contract sterilizers, and certainly importers. And we'll certainly go through this entire process as to why these changes are very profound, high impact, and significant. From a historical perspective, on March 26, 2010, FDA did issue the 28-page proposed rule at that time that would amend its regulations regarding device establishment, registration, and listing. This is all public domain information. This was docket number FDA 2009 N0014. And the proposed rule at that time, back in 2010, did contain 4 types of proposed changes to FDA's registration listing process as set forth in 21 CFR 807. Today, we will identify and expound and describe in sufficient time what are the critical, key, significant changes related to this final rule. From a historical perspective, for those who are new to the establishment registration process, establishments involved in the production and distribution of any devices intended for use in the U.S. are required to register annually in accordance with 807.20. No surprise, and this is non-negotiable. That means most establishments are also required to list devices that are made at their facilities and the activities that are performed on those devices. Translation, this is known as establishment registration and listing. Those companies required to register and list are also required to pay the associated annual FDA user fee. Currently, effective October 1st, 2012, the requirements for device establishment registration and listing has indeed changed. On August 2nd, 2012, FDA issued the Medical Device Establishment Registration and Listing entitled Notice of Changes for Fiscal Year 2013 and a final rule to implement the requirements enacted in Section 321 of the Public Health Security and Bioterrorism Preparedness and Response Act of 2002, also known as the Bioterrorism Act, and Section 207 of the Medical Device User Fee and Modernization Act. The notice and final rule require all registered device establishments to pay the annual registration fee, regardless of the type or activities conducted. In addition, certain establishments must comply with additional registration and listing requirements. Hence, we are going to go over those requirements in our presentation today. The most notable change, however, contained in the final rule requires all contract manufacturers and contract sterilizers to register the devices they manufacture and sterilize with the agency. Previously, contract manufacturers and contract sterilizers were exempt from registration and listing in accordance with 807.20 subpart C 1-2. However, effective immediately, the final rule does indeed eliminate the exemption for contract manufacturers and contract sterilizers, thus requiring those who were previously exempt to register, list, and pay the user fee. This change significantly expands the scope of establishments subject to the annual establishment registration listing requirements. As a result, FDA has estimates that the new rule will increase the number of establishments paying the user fee from 16,000 to 22,000 going forward. Other changes to the device registration listing requirements resulting directly from this new final rule include all registration and listing submissions must be made to the FDA through electronic means rather than paper form. 2, foreign establishments must identify all known importers in the name of each person who imports or offers to import a foreign establishment's device into the U.S. 3, all establishments, regardless, must pay a registration fee when they initially register with the FDA and for each annual registration thereafter. To make it official, the final rule, as stated and referenced in Federal Register Volume 77, number 149, was released on August 2nd, 2012. I also submit to you, if you do want to upload a copy, you can certainly go through to FDA.gov or through the GPO.gov site. Furthermore, this is the final rule, and it is effective regarding the implementation of device registration and listing requirements enacted in the Public Health Security and Biotourism Preparedness and Response Act of 2002, the Medical Device User Fee and Modernization Act of 2002, and Title II of the Food and Drug Administration Amendments Act of 2007. This makes it official. This is because FDA did amend its regulations to reflect the recent statutory amendments to the device registration listing provisions of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and these other amendments as set forth. The final rule for clarification is effective October 1st, 2012. In addition, the following changes are part of a final rule which aligns FDA regulations with the mandates of the FDA Safety and Information Act, the Medical Device User Fee and Modernization Act, and the Medical Device User Fee Amendments of 2012. The final rule is published in U.S. Federal Register, Volume 77, number 149, and some of the significant changes include the following as we go ahead and identify, describe, and elaborate as to these changes. The first significant change, number one, all finished device contract manufacturers, contract sterilizers must register with FDA. This includes both domestic and foreign entities. Contract manufacturers and contract sterilizers who did not commercially distribute finished devices were previously exempt from the requirement to register. So let me elaborate further as to why this is important. One of the significant changes is the elimination of the exemptions. Contract manufacturers, contract sterilizers are required to register your establishments and list your devices. As related to the exemptions, let me also clarify. Foreign establishments with devices that enter a foreign trade zone, also known as a FTZ, and then re-export from the foreign trade zone without entering the U.S. commerce are still required to register and list your devices. I will explain why this is important later under the exemptions as well as waivers, if waiver is granted by the agency through the Office of Compliance. However, foreign establishments with devices imported under the import for export provision are required, let me repeat, are required to register and list devices if you are a foreign establishment with devices imported under the import for export provision. So please take note of that as well. As of October 1st, 2012, the final rule eliminates this exemption and applies the registration requirements to these companies. Furthermore, FDA estimates that nearly 750 additional contract manufacturers need to register and list their devices that are handled by them. Another significant change, number two, finished device contract manufacturers and sterilizers now require their own U.S. agent if the contract manufacturer or contract sterilizer is not established in the U.S. That means no physical address on U.S. soil. The entity will also require a U.S. agent. We can certainly be engaged as a U.S. agent for foreign contract manufacturers or foreign contract sterilizers. Please note this does not apply to component manufacturers that are distributed only to a finished device manufacturer. However, if you are a manufacturer of accessories or components that are packaged or labeled for commercial distribution for health-related purposes to an end user, you still must register, list, and pay FDA's annual fee. So make note of that, please. Furthermore, continuation with change number two. If your finished device is made by a non-U.S. based contract manufacturer, it is very important that you make sure that you have appointed a U.S. agent and have registered with the FDA certainly prior to on or by October 1st, 2012 to avoid potential supply interruptions. For change three, again, for clarification purposes, foreign establishments must identify all U.S. importers, i.e. distributors of your devices. Foreign establishments whose devices are imported into the U.S. must identify all importers known to them. This includes the name of each person who imports or offers to import a foreign establishment's device into the U.S. for distribution within the supply chain within interstate commerce. Another significant change based on the final rule, change number 4. Your 510K or PMA number will be required when registering with FDA. If your device was cleared with a 510K submission, also known as a pre-market notification, or through an approved humanitarian device exemption, also known as the HDE, or a PMA pre-market approval, this number must be associated with the device listing under the new final rule requirements. This will allow devices to be tracked on the basis of regulatory clearance numbers, which will certainly improve the FDA's post-market surveillance efforts. For change number 5, a single point of contact and brand names to be required in the FDAAA system. The FDA's Unified Registration Listing System database. The FDA collects device registration listing information using an online system known as FDAAA, which is a very critical database for the agency in this regard. The final rule requires that each owner or operator identify one contact person within your organization who will be primarily responsible for creating a master account in the FDAAA system for the owner or operator. Moreover, the FDA will require the proprietary and brand names under which each device is marketed to be listed in the FDAAA system. Again, the final rule requires device manufacturers to register their products electronically on the FDA Unified Registration Listing System, aka FDAAA. That's part of the new rule. Each device manufacturer, both foreign and domestic, will establish an account on the FDA's online Device Establishment Registration Device Listing System, which will be used categorically to update information regarding its device. The new electronic system will allow FDA to more effectively gather information concerning marketed devices. The Federal Register posting states. So please make note of that as to the reason why this has now gone to an electronic system. The final rule applies to both the end product manufacturers and contract manufacturers. Very important to underscore that with the new rule. When an establishment experiences a problem, it can have a significant impact on the product lines from one or multiple firms for which it is contracted to provide manufacturing or sterilization services. Accordingly, the rule allows the FDA to efficiently and effectively identify which products are manufactured or sterilized at the affected site and quickly facilitate a recall of impacted devices. Also of note, as stated previously, the rule eliminates an existing exemption that foreign companies that re-export devices from a foreign trade zone, the FTZ, didn't have to comply with electronic registration requirements. By closing the exemption, effective immediately, the rule would have facilitated the FDA's collection of additional registration information from foreign establishments as required by the Public Health Security and Bioterrorism Preparedness and Response Act of 2002. Very important to underscore that as well. The rule certainly will update certain provisions in the regulations to improve the quality of registration and listing information available to FDA. FDA relies on having complete, verifiable, trustworthy, accurate registration listing information in order to accomplish a number of important public health objectives. FDA has said that the regulation requires domestic and foreign device establishments to register with the agency electronically and certainly will improve the quality of registration and listing information available to the agency. Furthermore, agency officials wrote the regulation wraps up the requirements of 3 distinct pieces of legislation, all of which establish various requirements for registering devices. For example, The FDA Amendments Act of 2007 requires electronic registration by domestic manufacturing facilities, while the Public Health Security and Bioterrorism Preparedness and Response Act of 2002 requires the same of foreign establishments. Elements of the Medical Device User Fee and Modernization Act of 2002 are also included in the bill, although FDA said it did not explain which ones, as currently stated in the final rule. Something to consider. But nonetheless, as we continue with our presentation, I also want to underscore the following. An establishment's failure to register and list, as required by this final rule, will cause companies, specifically will cause the firm's medical device to be deemed to be misbranded by the FDA pursuant to 21 U.S.C. Section 352, Subpart O. That's the reason why establishments should ensure that they properly register and list with the FDA under the guise of FDA's final rule, and specifically in compliance with 21 CFR Part 807. But nonetheless, in the same posting, FDA said it had originally delayed the implementation of such a system because it had until now been unable to create a system to receive the registrations. Such a system is now in place, no surprise, in the form of a 2007 system known as the Unified Registration Listing System, FIRLS. I also submit to you, FDA will still be authorized to grant waiver requests if and when appropriate and necessary on behalf of applicants or manufacturers. However, FDA, specifically the Office of Compliance, will be the governing body to make that final decision if you do submit a waiver, and will not be submitting your information electronically. I also submit to you that FDA believes this electronic system will ultimately make the process of submitting registration listing information for devices more efficient for both industry, and collectively will provide faster access to this information for both FDA and industry. In addition, the new system will allow the agency to more effectively gather information concerning your marketed devices in the global marketplace. We rely on having complete and accurate registration list information to accomplish a number of important statutory and regulatory objectives according to FDA. And this is the reason why this should improve the process to make it more efficient and certainly more effective on the agency side. The objectives include identifying establishments, identifying device shortages, and the source of problematic products, facilitating recalls, for example, Class 1, 2, or 3, conducting post-marketing surveillance, and identifying violators of federal law. As of October 1st, 2012, establishments will be required to follow these new registration listing requirements and responsibilities as clearly depicted and delineated within the final rule. Very important to underscore this in our presentation today. All proprietary names under which a device is marketed must be reported at a minimum when a device is first listed and during the annual update of registration and listing information. Drug device combination products must be identified as a combination product. And the type of combination product, for example, convenience kit, pre-filled drug delivery device, must be selected from the list that's currently displayed in FDA's Unified Registration Listing System, the database. It's very important to underscore that as well. Furthermore, as stated previously, all contract manufacturers and sterilizers of devices must register and list regardless of whether they put the device into commercial distribution or return the device to the manufacturer or specification developer. In addition, initial importers must identify the manufacturers of the devices they are importing. No exceptions. Foreign establishments exporting devices to the U.S. must identify all known U.S. importers of their devices. No matter if you have one importer or 20 importers, all that information is required under the new final rule requirements. Before a foreign exporter, contract manufacturer, or contract sterilizer can list a device, it must be listed by the manufacturer, specification developer, single-use device processor, reprocessor, or remanufacturer, or repacker, relabeler. So it's very important to list the device appropriately and accurately in this regard. Establishments that only handle complaints and previously registered as manufacturers or specification developers should change their establishment type to complaint file establishment as required by 820.198. Furthermore, establishments located in foreign trade zones must now register and list, as well as identify themselves as being located in a foreign trade zone. Furthermore, as part of the new requirement in the new change, all establishments that are required to register must now pay the annual registration user fee as required by the Food and Drug Administration Safety and Innovation Act. From a historical perspective as related to 21 CFR 807, it's very important to embellish and underscore and reiterate about who must register and submit a device list to begin with, irrespective of FDA's final rule. This means an owner or operator establishment not exempt under 510 subpart G of the Act or subpart D of this part who is engaged in the manufacture, preparation, propagation, compounding, assembly, or processing of a device intended for human use shall register, submit, listing information for those devices in commercial distribution, except that registration and listing information may be submitted by the parent, subsidiary, or affiliate company for all the domestic or foreign establishments under the control of one of the organizations when operations are conducted at more than one establishment. And there exists joint ownership and control among all the establishments. I also submit to you about how to register establishments and list your devices. Owners or operators of establishments that are subject to the registration and listing requirements in this part must provide the following information to FDA using the electronic device registration listing system. That means initial establishment registration information as required by 807.22 subpart A and 807.25. That also means updates to registration information as required by 807.22 and 807.25 as noted. This also relates to initial device listing information and also updates to device listing information as required by the particular sections as identified in 807. Something that we're going to talk about momentarily about updates and why you have 30 days to provide that update when any change or changes do occur. So please take note of that as well. This means, very important to elaborate and underscore, the times for establishment registration and device listing. This means initial registration and listing. An owner or operator of an establishment who has not previously entered into an operation described in 807.20 subpart A must, will, shall register within 30 days after entering into such an operation and submit device list information at that time. I also submit to you regarding registration and listing updates. Annual registration for each fiscal year is required for all establishments. That means annual registration shall take place during the period beginning on October 1st and ending on December 31st of each fiscal year for FDA. Updates to the registration information as described in 807.25 subpart B must be made within 30 days of any change to such information. This means Every fiscal year, during the period beginning on October 1 and ending on December 31st, owners or operators must review and update all of your device listing information that is on file at FDA. You are obligated and required to report any changes or deletions to any and all listings on your behalf and any new listings that were not previously reported. Very important to underscore. The accuracy of all information on file must be confirmed each year. It has to be authenticated. It has to be verified. It has to be validated for authenticity, integrity, accuracy, trustworthiness, regardless of whether any changes were made to the owner or operator's list of devices. Changes to listing information may also be made at other times, such as when a device is introduced into commercial distribution, when a change is made to a previously listed device, or when a previously listed device is removed from commercial distribution, which in effect removes it from the supply chain. Now, as stated previously, it's very important to reiterate the following. What happens if you fail to submit required information? The failure to submit any of the required information on time will put your establishment in a failed to register or failed to list status as applicable. The establishment will not be considered active, and the establishment registration and listing information may not appear on the FDA website until such time as the owner or operator submits and FDA processes the required information. So it would be incumbent and behoove you to ensure that you meet the timeline requirements as well as ensuring that the information being submitted and to be submitted is certainly accurate and has been fully authenticated and verified on your behalf. Very important. But nonetheless, the information required for device establishment registration device listing. Very important to underscore the following. All owners or operators that are subject to the registration listing requirements of this part must provide such information to us, i.e. FDA, by using the FDA Electronic Device Registration Listing System, also known as FERLS. Unless, and here's the caveat, unless granted a waiver from electronic submission in accordance with 807 2.1 subpart B. For listing information, your requirements and obligations are very obvious and straightforward. That means each owner-operator must maintain a historical file containing the labeling and advertisements in use on the date of initial listing and in use after October 10th, 1978, but before the date of initial listing as follows. 1. For each device subject to Section 514 or 515 of the Act that is not a restricted device, a copy of all labeling for your device. 2. For each restricted device, a copy of all labeling and advertisements for the device. 3. For each device that's neither restricted nor subject to Section 514 or 515 of the Act, a copy of all labels, package inserts, and a representative sampling of any other labeling as deemed appropriate and necessary and required. Additional listing information, subpart B. In addition to the requirements set forth in paragraph A previously, each owner or operator must maintain in the historical file any labeling or advertisements in which a material change has been made any time after the initial listing. It's very important. C, each owner or operator may discard labeling and advertisements from the historical file 3 years after the date of the last shipment of a discontinued device by the owner or operator. And also, I submit to you, the location of the file and requirements will be important as well. So it's very important to underscore a couple key points with this. It is your obligation to update all of your device listing information in a timely manner. Required if an additional establishment begins to engage in any of the activities described in 807.3 subpart D with respect to a listed device such as manufacturing, developing specifications, repackaging, relabeling, or otherwise processing the device. I also submit to you, in terms of updating your device listing information, updating of the listing is also required if your company begins performing another activity on or to the device in question, or ceases to perform an activity on or to the device that had previously been identified on the device listing and certainly published on FDA's website. But I do submit to you there are other additional requirements as set forth in 807 under the device listing requirements as well. So please take that under due consideration. I also submit to you that there is a summary of requirements for owners or operators granted a waiver from submitting required information electronically. So let me clarify. For initial registration and listing, owners or operators who have been granted a waiver from FDA from electronic filing status using the procedure set forth in 807.21 subpart B must send a letter containing all the registration and listing information described in the appropriate sections of 807 at the times described in 807.22 specifically to the Office of Compliance, Cedar H, FDA. So it's very important to underscore that if you should have a situation whereby it necessitates the need to request a waiver from the agency. Furthermore, in terms of notification of registrants, FDA will assign each device establishment a registration number after verifying the initial establishment registration information that has been submitted. The owner or operator of both the establishment will also be assigned an identifying number. Both numbers will be sent to the official correspondent by email. Now, just for clarification, the official correspondent means the person designated by you, if you're the owner or the operator of your company or establishment, as responsible for handling the annual registration of the establishment, or contact with FDA for device listing, or potentially and possibly maintenance and submission of the current listing of officers and directors to FDA upon request of the Commissioner, and some other requirements as set forth in 807. But it's also very important that the owner-operator establishment will also be assigned the identifying number. Both numbers will be sent to the official correspondent by email, again, or by postal mail, if the owner or operator has been granted a waiver from the requirement to file registration and listing information electronically. So it's very important to underscore that as well. But nonetheless, what about public availability of establishment registration and device listing information? Available for public inspection in accordance with Section 510 subpart F of the Act and will be posted on the FDA website with the exception of the information identified in paragraph subpart B of 807.37. What does this mean? The following listing information will not be available for public inspection or posted on FDA's website. For contract manufacturers, contract sterilizers, and private label manufacturers, the proprietary or brand names under which a device is marketed with the FDA assigned pre-market submission number, if this information would reveal a confidential business relationship. Other information that would not be made available. FDA assigned listing numbers. I also submit to you about misbranding and why this is important. If you fail to establish and list your device in accordance with the final rule and certainly in accordance with 807. Registration of the device establishment or assignment of a registration number does not in any way denote approval of the establishment or its products. Any representation that creates an impression of official approval because of registration or possession of a registration number is misleading and certainly in the eyes of FDA will constitute misbranding, which certainly carries ramifications and other penalties. If you are online today and you represent a foreign device establishment, A couple things to consider. Any establishment within any foreign country engaged in the manufacture, preparation, propagation, compounding, or processing of a device that is imported or offered for import to U.S. must, will, and shall register your company and list such device or devices using the same system as we have for domestic manufacturers, that being FDA's Electronic Device Registration Listing, or the FERL system. All of this must be done in accordance with 807.41 and Subpart B. In addition, the official correspondent for the foreign establishment shall facilitate the communication between the foreign establishment's management and representatives of FDA for matters relating to the registration of device establishments and listing of device products. Also submit to you identification of importers and persons who import or offer for import into the U.S. marketplace. Apply an initial registration annually, and at the time of any changes, each foreign establishment required to register and list, as provided in 807.40 Subpart A, must, using FDA's Electronic Device Registration Listing System again, submit the name, address, telephone, and other contact information as noted, and certainly any registration number, if it's been assigned, of any importer of the establishment's devices that is known to the foreign establishment. It's very important to underscore that with your importers. The foreign establishment must also specify which of the establishment's listed products each importer receives from the foreign establishment. Now, there may be conditions and times whereby you could be under the exempt status. What I would like to do is briefly identify the different exemption criteria. There are classes of persons that are exempt from registration in accordance with 807.20, and certainly under the guise and provisions of Section 510 Subpart G, 1, 2, and 3 respectively of the Act, or because the Commissioner of FDA has found under Section 510 Subpart G5 of the Act that such registration is not necessary for the protection of public health. For example, exemptions for device establishments could include a manufacturer of raw materials or components to be used in the manufacture or assembly of a device who would otherwise not be required to register. B, a manufacturer of devices to be used solely for veterinary purposes. C, manufacturer of general purpose articles such as chemical reagents or laboratory equipment, whose uses are generally known by persons trained in their use and which are not labeled or promoted for medical uses. And other exemptions for device establishments could include licensed practitioners, including physicians, dentists, optometrists, who manufacture or otherwise alter devices solely for their use in their practice. Other exemptions for device establishments include pharmacies, surgical supply outlets, or other similar retail establishments making final delivery or sale to the ultimate user. This exemption also applies to a pharmacy or other similar retail establishment that purchases a device for subsequent distribution under its own name. F, persons who manufacture, prepare, propagate, compound, or process devices solely for use in research, teaching, or analysis and do not introduce such devices into commercial distribution certainly would not have to register and list. They would be exempt. And others, as stated, include carriers by reason of their receipt, carriage, holding, or delivery of devices in their usual course of business as carriers, or persons who dispense devices to ultimate consumer, or whose major responsibility is to render service necessary to provide the consumer, that is, the patient, physician, so forth, with a device, or the benefits to be derived from the use of a device. I also submit to you, as part of our presentation, in content as presented herein, is that it's very important to identify when a pre-market notification submission is required. From the high-level perspective, it's stuff that's provided in paragraph subpart B of this section, 807.81. Each person who is required to register his establishment pursuant to 807.20 must submit a pre-market notification submission, i.e. the 510K, to the agency at least 90 days before proposing to begin the introduction or delivery for introduction to interstate commerce. for commercial distribution of your device intended for human use, which meets any of the criteria listed in 807.81. It's very important to underscore that. However, we also have exemptions in accordance with 807.85 if you are not required to submit a pre-market notification. 807, specifically 21 CFR 807.85, will certainly identify the exemption criteria if you do not need to submit a 510K, as well as 807.87 for information required in a pre-market notification submission. And that would be a recommendation as part of a regulatory advisement that if you do need to do a refresh on the 510K process, certainly it will behoove you to go back to 21 CFR 807 and specifically 87 to look at what information is required in any 510K and going forward. But nonetheless, it is important to understand that with these changes that have occurred as of 2012, is that one of the biggest significant changes will certainly be not just for contract manufacturers and your sterilizers, but the electronic submission process itself. Let me clarify. Domestic and foreign device establishments must submit registration listing information electronically through FDA's referral system. FDA noted that device establishment owners and operators have been actively using referrals since 2007 anyway, so this should be a very seamless process by doing this electronically. And as indicated previously, during my comments from earlier, the use of the system will improve the process of submitting registration listing information and provide faster access to the required information. Very important. Under the new rule, the implementation of device registration listing, all owners or operators of device establishments will be required to register electronically. So please take that under consideration going forward unless FDA grants you a waiver. Other formally exempt entities such as contract sterilizers and contract manufacturers, again, are now required to register under the new rule, which FDA said it will assist in its inability to have a complete and accurate registration of device establishments and listing information for devices, and certainly to accomplish FDA's regulatory objectives. Domestic manufacturers, establishments, too, will be required to list an official correspondent for the establishment as well as a contact person for the operator or owner of the facility. The contact person, let me underscore, is the only person who can administer the owner or operator's user accounts in the referrals system. And yes, foreign establishments will be subject to the same requirements, no exceptions, with the added caveat that their devices will not be allowed into the U.S. if their information is not within FDA's referrals system at the time of importation. Foreign establishments will also be required to maintain a list of all approved importers into the U.S., along with the name of an approved person at each import establishment. Also, to reiterate and underscore, FDA noted several exemptions to this rule, including one, allowing devices that enter a foreign trade zone, the FTZ, within U.S. without entering U.S. markets will be eliminated under the new regulation. The new system also requires manufacturers to list your 510K or HDE number for your clear devices along with your establishment listing, giving FDA another tool to help ensure that your devices that lack a required pre-market clearance or pre-market approval are not marketed. Finally, the rule moves beyond the abstract listings of prior versions and requires companies to identify what exactly your establishments do as part of their device listings and referrals. But nonetheless, owners or operators of places of business called your establishments or facilities that are involved in any aspect in the production and distribution of your devices intended for use in the U.S. must register annually with FDA. Congress has authorized FDA to collect an annual establishment registration fee for device establishments. A detailed list of the types of device establishments that are required to register and pay the fee certainly can be located at Who Must Register, List, and Pay the Fee at FDA.gov. There are no reductions on annual establishment registration fees for small businesses or any other group, so please make note of that. Before you is the current schedule of annual registration user fees for fiscal years 2013 through 2017. For 2017 as well as 2016, these fees are estimates as of today's date, so please take that under due consideration, because actual fees for that fiscal year will be determined and posted by August prior to each fiscal year going forward. Most establishments that are required to register with the agency are also required to list your devices that are made there, and certainly those activities that are performed on your devices. If your device requires pre-market approval or notification before being marketed in the U.S. within interstate commerce, then please, as an owner or operator, provide the FDA pre-market submission number, the 510K or PMA, PDP, or HDE number as appropriate and applicable. Very important. But it's also very important to understand that registration and listing provides FDA with the location of device establishments and the devices manufactured at those establishments. Knowing where devices are made increases the nation's ability, make no mistake, to prepare for and respond to public health emergencies, something to consider. Furthermore, there are many frequently asked questions about this new registration listing requirements from FDA. And a couple questions that I submit to you as part of my FAQs back to our audience today is basically related to why are these changes so important now? What are the changes to my device registration listing requirements, which now became effective on October 1st, 2012. So let me highlight, as part of my debrief and wrap up with our audience today, the following. The changes are profound and significant. All proprietary names under which a device is marketed must be reported, at a minimum, when your device is first listed and doing the annual update of registration and listing information. All right? Change 2, combination products. Products comprising the device and a biological product or drug must be identified as a combination product, and the type of combination product must be selected from FDA's list that's displayed in the current FDA Unified Registration Listing System database. I also mentioned earlier, all contract manufacturers and sterilizers of finished devices must register and list regardless, and here's the word, regardless of whether they put the device into commercial distribution or return the device to the manufacturer or specification developer. And yes, we did reiterate that initial importers must identify the manufacturers of devices they are importing. Foreign establishments that are exporting devices or offering devices for export to U.S. must, I repeat, must identify all known U.S. importers of their devices. And certainly, another big change involving a device must be listed by the manufacturer, specification developer, single-use device reprocessor, remanufacturer, or repacker and relabeler before a foreign exporter, contract manufacturer, or even a contract sterilizer can list it. I submitted to you from earlier in our presentation. Also, another change is that establishments that only handle complaints and previously registered as manufacturers or specification developers should change their establishment type, effective today, to complaint file establishment. And then, we mentioned earlier, establishments located in foreign trade zones, FTZs, must now register and list, as well as identify themselves as being located in a foreign trade zone. And then finally, another significant change to the device registration listing requirement. All establishments that are required to register must pay the annual registration user fee as required by FDA's Safety and Innovation Act, also known as FDAAA. Very important. Another question that I submit to our audience today as part of our debrief and final wrap-up. How do I update information for the owner, operator, or official correspondent? Very simple. Information for the owner, operator, and official correspondent is created and updated in the account management module of FDAAA. Access from the menu on the left side of the screen after logging into FDA's industry systems database, and all this information is currently referenced at FDA.gov. But the information you enter here for your account profile is automatically transferred to your device registration listing module, also known as the DRLM, records as the owner operator information. You can find step-by-step directions on how to update your owner operator official correspondent information on FDA's website at the reference entitled Updating Owner, Operator, and Official Correspondent Account Information. So it's very important to do a refresh and revert back to FDA's site for any additional clarification as related to these scope of changes being presented to our group. And then finally, question that I submit as part of my FAQ, should I include model numbers as part of the proprietary name? Response, model numbers may be included as the proprietary name or part of the proprietary name. Something to consider. However, another question that we entertain from industry. We make different devices at different establishments that are listed under the same device party code or submission number. Do we need to identify proprietary names on an establishment by establishment basis? Categorically, the response is no. The proprietary name need only be identified at the owner operator level, not the establishment level. You do not need to identify the names on an establishment by establishment basis. But nonetheless, we have come to the end of our presentation, today's webinar. I'm going to propose that we open up the lines for any questions that you may have. And certainly, if there are questions after today's webinar that we're unable to get to, please contact Global Compliance Panel, Compliance for All, with any questions, and we'll certainly get back to you promptly with the response in a very timely manner. But with that being said, I'd like to thank you again for your time and imminent participation, and we'll go ahead and open the lines for questions at this time. With that being said, thank you.
Thank you so much, David, for the wonderful presentation, and I would also like to thank all participants for cooperating with us. Ladies and gentlemen, as David mentioned, it's time for the Q&A to begin, and I request all who have questions for our presenter to click on the raise hand option, which is a palm-like icon at the bottom of your participants panel. Now, this is to ask your questions verbally, or you can post in your questions in the Q&A panel so that our presenter can read it out loud and then answer it for you. And if for any reason you're unable to ask your questions, using either of two means that I just mentioned, please share your question with me through chat, and I shall pass it on to our presenter, and we'll get that answered for you. Okay, David, I have a couple of questions which came through during the session in the Q&A panel. I'm not sure if you have answered it, but I'm just going to send it once again so you could read out and then answer it for our participants.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I've just gone ahead and sent the first question to you through chat, David.
Okay. Okay, one question I have before me is that on one slide in particular, it says you need a 510K, PMA, or HDE to do device listing. So how do you go about listings for exempt products? Very good question. You will have to go to FDA's database to find out under the exemptions categories which products are categorically exempt from the submission process, whether it's 510K, PMA, or otherwise. That information will be contained and referenced within FDA's database at fda.gov. That will be probably the only credible source of information in order to provide that response based on the question. But how do you go about listings for exempt products? The answer categorically will be the fda.gov database, or as I've experienced recently, sometimes you have to contact FDA directly in order to solicit additional information from FDA in terms of clarification and clarity. So that may be an option as well. When in doubt, my advisory recommendation is always contact FDA to ensure that the information is 100% verifiable and accurate before proceeding down that pathway. That would behoove you in order to ensure that you're making a very informed decision up front with all the right intel, data, and information on behalf of the agency. So that would be my recommendation. But for exempt products, FDA does have a listing of those exempt products as noted for the record. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much, David. I have another question. I'm going to forward it to you, okay?
Okay. In instance, when there's a manufacturer entering proprietary brand names on their device listing, do CMs, I presume contract manufacturers, and CS, contract sterilizers, need to also enter the proprietary brand names? That's very important because for this one in particular is that the most notable change contained in the final rule requires all contract manufacturers and all sterilizers to register the devices they manufacture and sterilize with the FDA. As stated in my presentation from earlier previously, these entities certainly were exempt from registration and listing requirements. However, they would not be exempt from providing the information as required under the final rule, which would be proprietary brand names as noted. This is the reason why I would submit to our attendee, our participants, is that at FDA.gov, medical devices, under the regulations and guidance, how to market your device, does have a list of a series of questions on proprietary brand names. And it's very important to underscore that because all contract manufacturers and sterilizers of finished devices, as stated today, must register and list regardless of whether they put the device into commercial distribution or, let me emphasize, or return the device to the manufacturer or specification developer. So that's the reason why the account holder has to include all current proprietary names or brand names under which each device is going to be or prospectively going to be marketed in the U.S. I also submit to you there is no limit to the number of proprietary names that can be added in this particular case. I also submit to you it's important to understand that also the names can now be uploaded from a spreadsheet that's formatted in Excel file or entered manually via the FURLS DRLM as stated earlier. So please take that under consideration because contract manufacturers certainly need to be keenly aware of these requirements because as a contract manufacturer or a contract sterilizer, if you have a finished device, you have to register and list regardless of whether you put your device into commercial distribution or return the device to the manufacturer or specification developer, depending on the circumstances. So that's why it's important to really underscore this as we go through this process. If you have additional questions on that, my recommendation, please contact the group, put your question in an email, and we'll provide a much more definitive, substantive written response that would lay this out in a more concise, coherent manner for you. But it's very, very important to understand currently what are the changes as of today's date to the device registration listing process and what impact those changes will have directly or indirectly as a contract sterilizer, contract manufacturer, and certainly as an establishment entity that would be subject to 807 and the new changes that are taking place, and certainly had taken place. If the product codes don't reflect the type of products that your CMs and CSs are handling, this is where it's going to be somewhat challenging, to be quite honest, and the product codes have to be obtained from FDA's database. It sounds like in this particular case, if the codes are not discernible, They're not locatable or identifiable within the current FDA system. This is where some type of follow-up with the agency is going to be requested and certainly advisable on my behalf. There are some limitations where some certain product codes may not be referenced. Therefore, by default, I always revert back to the agency to obtain guidance, clarity, in order to facilitate the decision-making process. So that would be my recommendation. If certain information, certain intel, certain data do not currently reside in the database, please contact the agency in that regard to solicit additional information and hopefully obtain a very definitive and timely response. Any additional questions on this particular question from this participant, please contact Global Compliance Panel and we'll certainly do a drill down, deep dive, and provide more information in that regard, however. So I do hope that offers some clarity on this particular question.
Thank you. David, David, would that be okay if you could answer one last question for our attendee? I've gone ahead and sent the question through a chat messenger.
Okay. Sorry, Ryan, can you resend, please?
Oh, sure. Just give me a minute. Okay, and ladies and gentlemen, in the meanwhile, before David could answer the question, we sincerely request you to share your feedback in the feedback form that has appeared on your polling panel right now. The feedback is just 8 questions, mostly multiple choice in nature, and it wouldn't take more than 2 minutes of your time to answer it. As polling would remain open till the end of the session, so you can answer it even after the Q&A is over. We will be grateful if you could stay back a little longer and complete this feedback for us. David, did you get the question?
I have not received it yet, no.
Okay, let me go ahead and read out the question in that case, David. The question is, product codes for my company's products are assigned for entire systems. CMS and CSS typically produce only one component of the system, so our product codes don't reflect the types of products CMS and CSS are handling. How does that work?
Actually, that was a question I just addressed Ron from earlier. Yeah, I think that was a delayed response, but let me just, since you brought this up, on behalf of your participants online today, it's very important to underscore a couple points with this. Certainly, the device has to be listed by the manufacturer, a remanufacturer, a single-use device reprocessor, a specification developer, or repacker, relabeler before you can list a device. That's something I wanted to just kind of reiterate once again, because the question that we always entertain is, do we have to include all proprietary names, that our listed device has ever been marketed under? And certainly, as I said earlier, no. However, it's also very important that when you go through this process, is that if you are a contract manufacturer or a contract sterilizer, and I'm trying to list a non-exempt device, and FERLs will not allow me to proceed, the question that we always entertain is, why can I not list this device? Because the device, by default, must be listed by the manufacturer, the remanufacturer, as stated earlier. This is the reason why you need to check under HTTP www.accessdata.fda.gov, go into the scripts, go to the CRDH site. You must go into the database no matter what. If that information is not readily available or discernible, you must contact FDA to get an additional regulatory advisory opinion or other recommendation in order to proceed down that pathway, in order to facilitate very effective decision making. Very important, because you want to ensure that you're getting exactly what you need from the agency in order to do this correctly, and also logically in order to understand what your responsibilities and obligations are in this regard. Again, by default, please contact Global Compliance Panel, Compliance for All, with any subsequent questions regarding this particular question as well as others, and we'll certainly do a drill down and provide a very definitive timely response back to our participants and our attendees online today. So I certainly hope that provides some degree of comfort knowing that. So please do not hesitate to contact the group.
Thank you so much, David. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the upcoming webinars from David Dilks. So if you feel that you are interested or if you want to know more about the areas covered in the session, you can go ahead and click on the link which I sent you, or you can visit our website, which is www.complianceforall.com. And we'd also like to inform all attendees, now if in case you feel that your team members, colleagues, friends might benefit from this webinar, we're happy to inform you that it will be available in the recorded format. So you can purchase it from our website, or you can call our toll-free numbers, which is listed on your screens right now. And as David mentioned, ladies and gentlemen, if you do have any additional questions after today's session ends, please go ahead and forward your questions to me, and I will forward it to David, and we will get that answered for you at the earliest. And just a reminder, we'd request you all to go ahead and fill in the feedback form before you could log off today's session, because your feedback is very important for us to go ahead and improve our future webinars. So request each and every one of you to fill in the information and then log off today's session. As I mentioned, ladies and gentlemen, any more questions, we request you to go ahead and forward it to me through chat now, or you could send me an email with the questions and I will pass it on to David. Okay, David, before we could conclude, any more final thoughts left?
Yes. First and foremost, Ron, I'd like to thank your customers and the attendees and participants online today. These were wonderful questions, and certainly for additional clarification that's still requested or required, as Ron alluded to, please do not hesitate to contact the group. We'll certainly get back with you promptly with more definitive, substantive information. Hopefully, it will allow you to facilitate your decision-making process as related to the codes or like thereof, as well as some of the exempt device-related queries that were submitted earlier. My final concluding remark, as a reminder, that with the significant change under the final rule, is that it's very important to underscore this, is that as an establishment, you are required to update your registration information within 30 business days of registration information changes. This is important because establishments will have the ability to access and edit registration information online, eliminating hard copy manual submissions. Therefore, this is the reason why FDA wants all of our domestic and foreign device establishments submit everything electronically to FDA through the FDAAA system. With that being said, thank you again for your time and participation and questions submitted thus far. Certainly, we look forward to hosting you at another future webinar. With that being said, thank you, and I wish you a good day ahead.
Thank you so much, David. Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, we look forward to having you with us again sometime soon. On behalf of our presenter, David R. Dills, and the entire Compliance for All team, I'd like to thank you all for participating in this webinar, and I wish you all a pleasant day ahead. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and David, thank you so much for your time. Have a good day and take care.
All right. Thank you, Ron. Have a good day. All right. Bye.